First, can you introduce yourself, talk a little bit about your background, and really what inspired you to get involved with climate science and environmental work?
Okay, so my name is Graciela Raga. I did my undergraduate degree in meteorology at the University of Buenos Aires in Argentina, and then my PhD in atmospheric sciences at the University of Washington in the United States. And I have worked in Canada and the UK before settling in Mexico City 29 years ago. So my original fields of study were cloud physics. My research over the years has broadened quite a bit, and in the context of the Degrees Initiative, we started thinking about heat waves and how do they impact Mexico, because we have had a very bad event recently, which led to a bunch of us looking a little bit further into the problem. And then the call for degrees came out. We thought, well, it'd be interesting to apply the analysis to where we reduce solar radiation and see what happens in the region.
Great, thanks. It's really good to hear a bit more about your background and what brought you into SRM work. You touched on a little bit about pollution and heat waves in Mexico. Can you talk a little bit about how climate change is affecting Mexico and the region more generally, and what challenges that poses?
Overall, we have seen an increase in temperature, on average temperature in Mexico, which is higher than the global average. But as the global average masks the inhomogeneities and regional differences, and so there are increases in temperature and increases in the trends that are much larger in the north of Mexico than in the south and the central region. Obviously, Mexico has a lot of very, very complex topography, so that has to be taken into account as well. Again, heterogeneously, not everywhere the same, but the combination of more days without rain and then increased intense rain has consequences for soil, for flooding, for biodiversity, for plants, ecosystems. So we see more droughts. The number of, for example, extreme droughts or exceptional droughts has been increasing, especially in the north of Mexico. But overall, it's the same message that the average temperature increase or the average change of precipitation does not reflect what is truly happening. In the tropics, the climate models have a lot of uncertainty. So it is very important to learn from the observations of the past in order to evaluate, assess what the climate models are telling us for the future, modeling that includes mitigation options such as the solar radiation management. So we still need to get better grasp of the uncertainty.
What were your first thoughts when you first heard about SRM or saw it discussed?
Yes, well, coming from the cloud physics community, I have known about the modification of clouds by pollution for a long, long time. I learned around the time that Dr. Paul Crutzen published that paper as a potential mitigation option, because I had invited him to Mexico. and we were a little surprised when he mentioned his thoughts about that. So I think it was like in 2005 or something like that he came into Mexico for a panel discussion at the Mexican Academy of Sciences. I actually, in fact, teach it both in the meteorology, the aerosol physics component and the cloud physics component, both aspects. No, and students are very surprised to see from the satellite measurements what happened after the Pinatubo eruption. Of course, many of them were not even born, obviously, at that time, but the signal was clear, and the whole community realized the impact of nature doing that radiation experiment. So we have been aware about the topic, and I feel comfortable addressing it from the theoretical point of view, which is what we're doing by analyzing the results of climate modeling.
Has your thoughts on solar radiation modification as a potential approach changed as a sort of like way to reduce climate risk? Has your thinking changed since you've studied it more, or is this what you're still wanting to explore more of through obviously your upcoming research with degrees?
I want to explore it more because personally I have not looked at it from this global modeling standpoint. I think it's very important that we evaluate both the potential benefits and drawbacks that can, because as I was saying, the climate in Mexico is very different in different regions. It's a large country, but also it's in the transition between the tropics and the subtropics. And so what would happen is of interest to me in the context not only of heat waves, but for example, what will happen to the distribution of extreme precipitation in terms of the application of geoengineering. I still feel very strongly that we can solve the climate change by reducing emissions and reaching net zero. I mean, we know how we can solve the problem, and we know that there are vested interests that inhibit the progress towards that solution, which is the most favorable solution, right? What I see is that more and more the governments are basically rather than ending emissions, they have been working around that by introducing other topics. And I fear that they may think that this is an option, but we know what happens once whatever version of solar radiation management you apply, when you stop, the consequences could be catastrophic. But suppose it does happen, or it comes to the forefront, and then different countries will need to have experts that have studied the problem so that they can provide good advice on how to proceed. It will need people, scientists that have had the experience of working in the field of this solar radiation management approaches, so that they can explain clearly what the benefits would be and what the drawbacks would be, and what would the commitment of the global community has to be. So in that sense, what I see is that there is a lack of willingness by the really the concert of nations, and that very powerful ones have dragged their feet and have not moved us forward fast enough. And it is, we are seeing now what the community, the research community has talked about that would happen, the increase in frequency of extreme events. So things can get a lot worse before they get better, hopefully.
And I mean, given that global context, you were talking about countries dragging their feet on reducing emissions. How important is it then that these regions who are most affected by climate change are kind of central to that research and decision making on things like SRM?
I think it is very important to have some scientists that would study the problem, and then them will be able to advise their governments with the knowledge of, as I was saying, benefits and potential drawbacks, so that they can make a more informed decision or put forward a position as a country and defend it in the international fora. Right. So I think it's very important to have delegations from all countries to be knowledgeable about the problem, as delegations have become knowledgeable about mitigation and adaptation throughout the decades that this has been discussed, and it would be good to see countries really committing seriously to emissions reductions, much more than the NDCs, right? We can really reach net zero by 2050 and global transitions. It will benefit so much the population, having so much less pollution around. So if the motivation is the well-being of the planet, including humans plus all the ecosystems, then there is no other way but reduction of emissions. And we know that the world is moving towards more and more urban populations. Certainly in Latin America, already 80% of the population lives in cities. So improving the conditions in cities and the sustainability of cities is super important in Latin America.
So just finally, to talk a little bit about your project with upcoming project with degrees, just tell us a little bit about what you'll be doing on that research project and how the degrees funding will support that work.
The project focuses on the heat waves, as I was mentioning, but again, with special emphasis on the spatial distribution, and that within that spatial distribution with the urban sustainability aspect, because we saw a lot of problems even in the north where they are used to the heat waves. The mortality increased quite a bit during the last one, and that is unacceptable. And so we need to focus on how much would the heat waves be reduced, for example, is a specific question, or will they still occur, or with lower intensity compared to the business as usual scenario. So those are the questions, the specific questions that we can address, looking at business as usual versus this mitigation option, and with special focus on urban areas. And Mexico has many urban areas with more than 1 million inhabitants. So those will be the first ones that will be addressed. I am very excited because our postdoc is a student that was a master's student in our group, but then went to the US to do his PhD. And my experience is I always, suggest students to go and get their PhDs abroad, because they experience a different way of working and so on. But it's very hard for them to come back to Mexico. So, you sow the seeds and you expect some to return as fruit. And it seems that it will be in this case. So it was very good to be able to incorporate him in this project. So looking forward to that aspect as well, which is a little bit more of a, in the sense, not so much from the science point of view, but for the science system in Mexico.